Go to your bedroom tonight. Wait until the house is quiet. Turn off every light except one, something dim, a candle if you have it, a phone screen angled away if you don't. Now stand in front of the mirror. Look at your face, not a glance, a stare. Hold your own eyes. Don't blink if you can manage it. Don't look away. Just look. After 30 seconds, something will begin to happen. The edges of your face will soften. The features will start to blur. After 60 seconds, the blur will deepen into something else. Your nose will seem to flatten or elongate. Your cheekbones will shift. The shadows around your eyes will darken into hollows that don't match the face you saw when you walked in. After 90 seconds, if the lighting is dim enough and your gaze is steady enough, you may see something that will make every hair on your body stand up. A face that is not yours, not a hallucination, not a trick of the light. A documented, repeatable, neurologically verified phenomenon that occurs in every human brain under specific conditions. Conditions that, for the entirety of human history before electric lighting, existed in every bedroom every night. The ancient world knew about this. Every culture that left records about mirrors described it, and every one of them arrived at the same conclusion. Do not sleep in front of a mirror. Do not place a mirror where it faces the bed. Do not allow a reflective surface to capture your image while you are unconscious, vulnerable, suspended in the territory between waking and sleep, where the brain does things the conscious mind cannot control. The deeper I went into why, the more I realized that the prohibition wasn't superstition. It was observation. Thousands of years of observation of something that modern neuroscience only confirmed in 2010. And the confirmation is more disturbing than anything the ancients imagined. Start with the science, because the science is where the horror lives. In 2010, an Italian psychologist named Giovanni Caputo published a study that should have changed everything we think we know about mirrors. He placed 50 healthy individuals in front of a mirror in a dimly lit room, the light level roughly equivalent to candlelight, and asked them to stare at their own reflected face for 10 minutes. The results were unanimous. Every single participant experienced what Caputo called the strange face illusion. The descriptions were extraordinary. Subjects reported seeing huge deformations of their own facial features. Faces of people they'd never met. Faces of deceased parents, archetypal faces, an old woman, a child, a portrait of an ancestor, animal faces, a cat, a pig, a lion, and in some cases, fantastical and monstrous beings, faces that were not human, faces that looked back at them from the glass with an expression the subject had not made. All 50 participants reported a feeling of otherness, the sense that the face in the mirror was not theirs, that something else was looking back, that the boundary between self and reflection had become unreliable. Caputo named the phenomenon. He documented it. He published it in a peer-reviewed journal. And then the world moved on. Because the implications of what he found are so unsettling that nobody quite knew what to do with them. This raises a simple but critical question. If every human being who stares at their own reflection in dim light for 60 seconds begins to see faces that are not their own, what did every human being who lived before electric lighting see in their bedroom mirrors every night? Because before 1879, before Edison's light bulb, before gas lighting became common in private homes, every mirror in every bedroom was a mirror by candlelight. Every reflection was dim. Every face in the glass was soft, shadowed, operating at exactly the light level that Caputo's experiment identified as the trigger for the strange face illusion. Every person who woke in the night and caught their reflection in the mirror was seeing themselves under conditions that modern science has demonstrated produce involuntary hallucinations of monstrous, unfamiliar, or deceased faces. Every night. 4. Millennia. The evidence suggests something much larger than superstition. Now go look at what the ancient world actually said about mirrors in bedrooms, because they weren't vague about it. They were specific. and their specificity matches the science with a precision that should make you uncomfortable. In ancient China, the practice of feng shui developed an elaborate system of rules about mirror placement. The central prohibition was explicit: never place a mirror where it reflects the bed. The reasoning was described in terms of qi, life force energy. A mirror facing the bed was said to bounce energy around the room during sleep, creating excessive yang, active energy, in a space that should be governed by yin, stillness, and rest. The sleeper would experience restlessness, nightmares, and disturbances. The mirror was understood as an activator, a surface that kept the room in a state of alert when the body needed unconsciousness. But beneath the energy framework, there was a darker warning. Feng shui texts describe the mirror as creating a third presence in the bedroom, a doubling, a reflected figure that occupies the same space as the sleeper but is not the sleeper, an other. In European folklore, the prohibition was more explicit. Mirrors were understood as portals, surfaces through which the boundary between the physical world and something else became thin. During sleep, the soul was believed to leave the body, and if it encountered its own reflection, it could become confused about which body was real and which was the reflection. It could become trapped in the glass. It could fail to return. The mirror in the bedroom wasn't just a bad idea, it was a trap for the soul. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. In Jewish tradition, mirrors are covered during Shiva, the 7-day mourning period following a death. The stated reason is to prevent the soul of the deceased from being trapped in the reflective surface. The practice is specific, universal within the tradition, and ancient. In Victorian England, mirrors were covered when someone died in the house. In parts of Russia, mirrors were turned to the wall at night and during thunderstorms. In the Balkans, newborn infants were kept away from mirrors for the first year of life to prevent their unformed souls from being captured, as if they were following instructions they didn't fully understand. Now connect the folklore to the neuroscience. Because Caputo's experiment didn't just document the strange face illusion, it explained the mechanism, and the mechanism is built into every human brain. The illusion is produced by a phenomenon called Troxler's fading, first described by the Swiss physician Ignaz Paul Vital Troxler in 1804. When the human eye fixates on a single point for more than a few seconds, the neurons responsible for processing the peripheral visual field begin to adapt. The unchanging stimulus, in this case the reflected face, causes the neurons to reduce their response. The peripheral features begin to disappear. Your nose fades, your cheekbones dissolve, the contours of your face become unstable. And here's where the horror begins. The brain cannot tolerate missing facial information. The human visual system contains dedicated neural pathways for face processing, pathways so deeply wired that they activate within milliseconds of encountering anything that resembles a face. When Troxler's fading removes the peripheral features of your reflected face, these pathways don't shut down, they accelerate. They begin to fill in the missing information using whatever material is available: memories, expectations, fears, fragments of other faces stored in the visual cortex, archetypal facial templates that the brain carries from birth. The brain, confronted with its own fading face, panics, and in its panic, it constructs faces from the library of every face it has ever seen. Your mother's face, a stranger's face, an animal's face, a face that never existed. The monstrous beings that Caputo's subjects reported were not supernatural, they were neurological. They were the product of a brain desperately trying to reconstruct a face from diminishing information, drawing on material that the conscious mind has no access to and no control over. And this process, this involuntary generation of other faces from the fading of your own, happens in every human brain, in every person, under conditions that existed in every bedroom in the world before electric lighting. The silence was deafening. I want to pause here and ask something that isn't usually asked. What did your ancestors actually see? Because they weren't reading Caputo's study. They weren't thinking about Troxler's fading or neural adaptation or the fusiform face area of the visual cortex. They were lying in bed, in a dark room, in candlelight. And they woke in the night, as humans have always woken in the night, during the interval between the first sleep and the second sleep. And they opened their eyes. And in the mirror across the room, they saw a face. Not their face. A face that was looking back at them. A face they might have recognized as a dead relative. Or a face they had never seen before. Or a face that was not, by any definition they possessed, human. What would you conclude if you had no knowledge of neuroscience, no framework for understanding involuntary visual hallucination, no language for Troxler's fading, and you woke in the dark and saw a monstrous face staring at you from the glass? What would you believe? You would believe the mirror was haunted. You would believe that spirits lived in reflective surfaces. You would believe that the soul was vulnerable during sleep, and that the mirror was a portal through which something could enter. You would build rules around mirror placement. You would cover mirrors when someone died. You would forbid them in bedrooms. You would develop, across your culture and across centuries, an elaborate system of prohibitions and rituals designed to manage the thing in the glass that appeared when the light was low and the mind was unguarded. And you would be wrong about the mechanism, but you would be right about the phenomenon. Something does happen in mirrors, in dim light. Something does appear that is not the viewer's face. The brain does produce involuntary hallucinations of other faces, including monstrous ones, under exactly the conditions that existed in every pre-electric bedroom. The ancients were observing something real. They were describing something that neuroscience has confirmed. They just didn't have the vocabulary to explain it as a neural event, so they explained it as a spiritual one. The deeper I went, the more I found that the mirror prohibition follows the same pattern as every other ancient observation I've studied, a real phenomenon observed across cultures, described in the language of spirits and portals and souls, dismissed by modernity as superstition, and then confirmed by the very science that dismissed it. The ancients said, "The yawn lets something in." Neuroscience found mirror neurons firing across bodies. The ancients said certain sounds drive away evil. Psychoacoustics found that inharmonic bell frequencies produce theta brainwave states. The ancients said mirrors are dangerous in the dark. Neuroscience found that dim light mirror gazing produces involuntary hallucinations in every human brain tested. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. They weren't wrong. They were early. Now here's the thread that nobody wants to pull. Because Caputo didn't stop at documenting the strange face illusion, he kept studying it, and what he found in subsequent research raises questions that the scientific community has acknowledged but not resolved. In follow-up studies, Caputo found that the strange face illusion produced measurable dissociative states in participants, not just visual distortions. Psychological effects. Subjects reported feelings of depersonalization, the sense that their own face was no longer theirs. Derealization, the sense that the reflected world was no longer real. And in some cases, dissociative identity experiences, the sense that the face in the mirror belonged to someone else entirely, someone with a separate existence, a separate identity, a separate will. These aren't minor effects. These are the clinical markers of dissociative disorders. And they were produced in healthy individuals, with no psychiatric history, by nothing more than 60 seconds of looking at their own face in a dim mirror. This raises a simple but critical question. What does it do to a person to sleep for years in front of a mirror in candlelight? What does it do to a child who grows up in a bedroom where the glass catches their face every time they wake in the dark? What cumulative effect does nightly exposure to involuntary facial hallucination have on a developing nervous system, on a sense of self, on the boundary between I and not I that the brain constructs and maintains across a lifetime? The research doesn't exist. Nobody has studied long-term exposure. nobody has asked what centuries of pre-electric mirror gazing did to the human psyche. The question sits in the silence between the neuroscience and the folklore, unanswered, unasked, and profoundly uncomfortable. The official explanation collapses here, because we're told that mirror superstitions were primitive, irrational, the product of pre-scientific minds projecting fear onto inanimate objects. But the pre-scientific minds were observing a real phenomenon. They were developing practical rules to manage a genuine neurological event. They were, in effect, practicing neuroscience without knowing the word, building cultural protocols around a brain function that the scientific establishment wouldn't document for another 2,000 years. And when electric lighting arrived, when bedrooms were flooded with enough light to prevent Troxler's fading from activating, the phenomenon stopped. The faces in the glass disappeared. The prohibition lost its experiential basis, and within a generation, mirrors in bedrooms went from forbidden to decorative. Nobody was afraid of them anymore. Nobody saw anything in them anymore. The light was too bright. The brain no longer needed to fill in the gaps. And the ancient knowledge, the knowledge that mirrors do something to the human mind in the dark, was filed under superstition and forgotten. I don't have a complete theory. I have a question that multiplies the deeper I look. Why did every ancient culture independently develop prohibitions against mirrors in bedrooms? Why did the specific fears they described, seeing other faces, seeing the dead, seeing monstrous beings, match exactly what modern neuroscience has documented under identical lighting conditions? Why did the prohibition disappear at the exact moment when electric lighting eliminated the conditions that produced the phenomenon? And why has no researcher studied what centuries of nightly exposure to the strange face illusion did to the human mind before the light bulb made it stop? I'll leave you with this. Tonight, before you go to sleep, look at your bedroom. Is there a mirror? Can you see yourself in it from the bed? If you can, consider what your ancestors would have told you. They would have told you to cover it, to turn it to the wall, to remove it from the room where you sleep. Not because they were superstitious, because they had spent thousands of years sleeping in candlelight, and they knew what happens to a face in a dim mirror. They knew what the brain does when it watches its own reflection fade. They knew what comes to fill the space where the face used to be. You don't see it anymore. The electric light is too bright. The phenomenon doesn't activate. The faces don't come. Your mirror is safe, as long as the light stays on. But turn off the light. Sit in front of the glass. Hold your own eyes for 60 seconds, and watch what your brain does to your face when the darkness gives it permission. The ancients already know what you'll see. They've been telling you for 3,000 years. You just stopped listening because someone gave you a light bulb and told you there was nothing in the dark.